Here's the big question this show answers. How do we leverage technology and human science to positively impact our personal and professional life? The Tech Human Experience has the answer. Here's your host, Inc. 5000 tech founder, neuroscience junkie, and Navy SEAL wannabe, Javier Guerra.
Hello, my fellow tech humans. Today's guest is a recognized disaster responder to high visibility technology problems, a podcast host, and has led critical communication teams during monumental events such as the 9/11 incident at the Pentagon. He's now helping enterprises build resilient, secure, and robust application infrastructures. Please welcome Bill Alderson. Thanks for your time today, Bill.
Thanks, Javier. Really good being with you today.
Yeah, good talking to you again. Let me share this stat with you, to get us started off. So a study by Cybersecurity Ventures predicts that by the year 2025, cybercrime will cost the world $10.5 trillion annually, up from only $3 trillion in 2015. As a disaster recovery expert, what do you think are the key factors driving this increase, and how can businesses adapt to protect themselves?
Well, first of all, the organizations today are focused on detect and respond. Detect and respond means that the hacker is already in. Yep. So that's when they are, and where they're willing to spend money is on detect and respond, mainly because they can't really quantify prevention. So consequently, they're spending all the time and energy and money over there and not on prevention. So my belief is a greater emphasis on preventing those problems as opposed to, finding them and then responding. Obviously, you need to respond. Obviously, you need to detect. But the first line of defense, in my opinion, and the best effort is at preventing.
Proactive prevention. So let's dive in. Today's topic is building resilient and secure application infrastructures in a world of cyber threats. In this episode, we'll explore the importance of disaster recovery planning, the role of cybersecurity in business continuity, and Bill's experiences in guiding organizations through crisis. So, Bill, you have an interesting background, and I'd really like to highlight some of your experiences in the real world for the audience. From a tech perspective, what do you see for the future of disaster recovery and cybersecurity? And, maybe in some relation to what you've been through or a real world experience, if you can tie it to that somehow, how can organizations really prepare for it?
First, by lessons learned from the past. Mm-hmm. Every time I go in and solve a critical problem or respond to a critical incident, the first thing that I do is I keep track of everything that we do and everything that happens during that incident, so that we, at the end, can go back and take a look at, well, what lessons did we learn? And then from those lessons learned, we apply best practices to improve things like network and system documentation so that you can recover more rapidly. When I went to the Pentagon, immediately when I got there, armed guards brought us in. We came into a smoldering building. We were ushered down to the basement to start recovering from communications failures that the event occurred. And I said, let's get the network diagrams, get them up on the wall, and let's go about trying to solve the problems. They looked at me and said, well, all of our documentation is online, and the aircraft destroyed the server that information was on. So the next step was they put me in a huge war room, and we got all the network engineers and application engineers, and this war room literally had whiteboards on all sides. And they just started diagramming out the network from memory. And then we'd look and reverse engineer by logging into routers, switches, servers, and other such systems, firewalls, and reverse engineering the network and diagramming it out. Well, had they printed out those diagrams, that would have prepared them better for the disaster recovery. So owning your architecture and having your system documented allows hundreds of people to operate and work on that system productively. When it's not documented for whatever reason, whether an aircraft destroys the network documentation or the system documentation, or it's just non-existent, and you have one or two people who know everything, and those people become a bottleneck. So you can take 300 people in your IT organization and make them very productive by giving them the documentation that they need to solve every day. They get another trouble ticket, they get another problem, and they can resolve it. 300 people can work very productively instead of lining up at the 2 or 3 people's cubicle, getting a now serving number, right? Walking in, kissing the ring of the pontiff and getting the information about how their system is documented. And that's what I call architecture ownership. It's a best practice. And I learned that and basically tell people, hey, this is what you need to do to prepare for disaster.
Yeah. And sometimes as humans, we have to learn the hard way, right? It is scary to me. You know, we work with clients, and, you know, nobody's perfect. Like we're not perfect either. Right. But it's scary to me at how many organizations have lack of documentation, it's especially scary to me when it comes to security teams. So, you know, talking to a CISO or a high level technology leader, and them communicating to us that, you know, one of my biggest problems is we're not really documenting properly. And we have these highly paid consultants in here that are trying to make improvements, but they can't really make improvements because we don't have proper documentation. And, you know, we're building tools and handing them over to operations, and they're not really getting handed over effectively, and operations isn't really leveraging the technologies. And, you know, for me, I just think it's exceptionally critical when you're talking about security teams that, you know, you have to have that proper documentation. I love what you're talking about here as far as documentation and learning from past experiences. It makes me remember or think of the phrase that a smart man learns from his mistakes, but a wise man learns from the mistakes of others, or
exactly.
from the mistakes already made. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Otherwise you're going to repeat those things. Now, in a large hospital situation where they had, you know, 5 or 6 hospitals in the same regional area, clinics, et cetera, all connected in together to an Epic system that managed all of their medical capabilities. Mm-hmm. They basically had no network documentation that was accurate. Mm. And so we went in and helped them reverse engineer, brought things up to date, and we created a diagram that was basically about 10 feet long. And the security folks came over to take a look at the diagram, and they looked at me and they looked at that diagram and they said, this is the first time I've ever been able to see the potential holes in our architecture of where things can come in and where we need to protect. So if you don't have a diagram, you can't see visually, and humans are visual. Yep. Let's face it. We like diagrams. We like to put our finger on the diagram. And when you go to build a building, it's essential. You have to have it to modify the building. You have to have it to build the building. And so consequently, the same factors apply there in order to be able to operate in that kind of environment. You have to have your application flows. You have to know where your systems, whether they're in the cloud or in a colo or in a premise, you have to know where things are and how, and be able to visualize where things can get in and where you need to make certain that you're preparing for the worst.
Absolutely. And what's the saying? Is a picture is greater than 1,000 words? Something like that?
Yes. Well, a picture
is greater.
Yeah, picture is better than 1,000 words, and that's true because we can rapidly assimilate and understand an architecture. A lot of companies that don't document their systems, they end up with a big problem because every time they bring in a new CISO or a new CIO or a new technology person, they try to make that network look like where they just came from. So it ends up not being consistent. So I say, document your system, and when every person comes in, every organization comes in, you train them on your architecture so that they don't ruin your architecture, and there's some stability as you go through. It's very powerful. It seems simple. People don't do it, and they think they can just buy some software and click and it's done. No, it's a big job. You have to architect it just like an architect diagrams out multi-story building, all of the structure, the structural walls, all of the elements of that building and all the elements of a network, including security, firewalls, and other such things have to be designed in. And if your people can't visualize it, it takes 1,000 words in order to explain what's wrong, and they can't and every trouble ticket, they have to reverse engineer the entire network, and it just gets crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it made me chuckle because I was thinking about like HR, right? Like orientations, like orientation is not only for HR, right? It's our job as leaders to orient people to whatever department they're coming into, whether that be application infrastructure, security infrastructure, whatever. But that's key to our methodology is using visuals, right? Having visuals so that people can visualize it and kind of see the big picture, but then backing it up with that documentation. And, I'm a big neuroscience, geek when it comes to that kind of stuff. So within neuroscience methodologies, they say that the brain learns 60,000 times faster with visuals. And so that to us, that visualization is huge with whatever we're doing.
Now, the other element of that, Javier, is Albert Einstein, admittedly one of the most brilliant people. These young people who come to work for your organization, they're young, their minds are fast, they can remember everything because they don't have much in there quite yet. And like Albert Einstein said, he said, why should I commit to memory those things that I can write down or document and then refer to? And that's what we're talking about. The architecture is too complex. You have to have details of how things are done pulled out and put on paper so that you can understand and change things or modify things and not break something else while you're doing it. So that's what I try and tell people. It's like, hey, be like Einstein, be smart. Don't use your brain for memorization of all these minutia details. Write it down, put it on paper so that you can visualize it, see it, and rapidly assimilate and respond.
What allows you to offload that data to free up more processing power to solve problems and go about your day, right? So absolutely. So Bill, what emerging technologies do you believe will have the most significant impact on disaster recovery, application infrastructure security, and or business continuity in the coming years?
Well, the number one thing today, and has been for some number of years, is backing up your data and sequestering it so that when somebody does do a ransomware successfully, it doesn't hit all of your backups. And sometimes it takes a year, right, before you recognize that some parts of your system have been compromised, and they leave landmines in there so that they can get in later or what have you. So the interesting thing is that having a layered backup capability so that if in 3 months you realize that part of your system was compromised 3 months ago, you're going to have to back up to 3 months ago and then figure out how to incrementally adjust things. So you need backups that go back some period of time to make sure that you're not essentially backing things up to what has been compromised or that what has been encrypted and that sort of thing. And speaking of encryption in ransomware, one of the things that I believe has led to this economic criminal ecosystem is that, and I'm not trying to beat anybody up. I'm just realizing that, the U.S. intelligence agencies lost a lot of their lawful intercept tools because they themselves got compromised. So these tools that are the equivalent of digital nuclear weapons got in the hands of hackers. And that happened just prior to about 2015 in that particular area. And if you look at the incidence of ransomware and the cost of ransomware and the effectiveness of ransomware, right about 2015, the hockey stick went straight up, and it hasn't stopped, like you cited with those things. So we have now much smarter criminals because the U.S. government's intel agencies lost the very tools that they were using for lawful intercept to go and break into criminal networks to break them up and that sort of thing. But sadly, if you go back and look at all of the Washington Post articles, NPR articles, that sort of thing, New York Times articles on these intel agencies losing their own lawful intercept tools, these digital nuclear weapons, and then boom, it took off like a rocket and it hasn't stopped.
Craziness. And you don't hear, I don't hear about this on like mass media, right? Of course, they're not going to like.
Well, it actually is on mass media.
But
you just have to go look for it. Just put in NSA loses hacking tools, and it's prolific. It's everywhere. But nobody has really looked at the statistics of ransomware and correlated it to that. And I happen to have, just recently studied that and taken a look at it. And it is exactly that hockey stick takes off just around 2015, right after several CIA and NSA lost those tools that they were using legitimately and developed with billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money. But sadly, they too were subject to getting hacked themselves. And legislatively, they gave the NSA a waiver so that they didn't have to hold themselves to the same level that all federal agencies did. And now they regret not, because we thought the smartest men in the room would make sure that they didn't get compromised. And sadly, they didn't impose upon those agencies the same federal regulations to make sure that they battened down the hatches and didn't get compromised themselves. So now it's history. And what do? We learn from those lessons. But just like anything that's bad news in the past, what do? We learn from those lessons. We see what happened. And that's exactly what these agencies are doing now. They're basically making certain that they don't lose any of those tools, and they hold them much closer to the vest than they did. But the damage was done, and it's still accelerating today. And we just need to make sure that that stops.
Yeah. It's an increasingly scary topic, with everything that's going on in the evolution of technology and the threat landscape. It's definitely going to be very interesting to see how everything unfolds. So from a more human perspective, can you share your experience leading into the 9/11 Pentagon communications team, right? Like dealing with those issues, and really maybe help share some kind of help us understand maybe what were some of the mental challenges that you guys faced during the incident or around the incident?
Yeah, happy to do that. Obviously, rushing into a smoldering building wasn't the first thing on our minds to do, but in what happened, that ends up what fire people do, and people who are called to service, they have to go do those things.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, the people, that's what I do, right? I go in and solve problems. But most people at the Pentagon, that's not what their job was. So they had to get up in the morning and decide to go and put themselves in harm's way. We didn't know what other shoe was going to drop at the time. So if you remember, now we know nothing else happened. But at the time, we didn't know if there's going to be another aircraft or another shoot-a-drop or what have you. So those people who were working in the Pentagon were heroes to go back in and continue on, in the face of danger. So, that's something that those people who work there had to endure. Now, when we got there, the Pentagon was surrounded. They had us meet them at the perimeter, and everybody had, soldiers with guns all the way around the Pentagon. We met some of them, and they brought us in. And that was the beginning of a few weeks where we went in and started doing what I told you. We diagnosed those problems. And now in that situation, I didn't have this occurrence, but psychologically, when I go in and do critical problem resolution and the problem is big, sometimes it's because some security thing has happened, some performance issue has happened, something breaks. People who are responsible for that technology sometimes take it very seriously. So I've had to be a bit of a counselor, and because when a company has been down on a certain thing for like 3 months and it's affected their bottom line and all the people, and then they find out it was the firewall that you brought in. Now this person feels very responsible. So I had to take and say, look, this is just a symptom of our using technology, and you need to pull yourself out of the fact that, okay, you recommended that firewall and it had this particular problem in it that got compromised. It doesn't mean that it's your personal fault. So we have to divorce ourselves of that type of responsibility. Or, sometimes I've feared for some of the folks who ended up being, their systems were implicated. So the network people call me in and say, hey, we've got this application that's really bad. Would you go figure out what's wrong with this application? And then I find out that it's their network. Well, now I have to give them the bad news that the very people who are paying me or brought me in to, show that this application was bad, it ended up being their network that was bad. So there's some emotional things that go along with that, because people get pretty serious about their job performance. They're afraid that they're going to have reprisals or get fired and that sort of thing. So you have to keep an environment from the HR standpoint of making it safe for people to sometimes make mistakes. And that's a really good lesson learned. Some people think that if they make a mistake and it costs their company money, that they're going to dock their paycheck, right? So they haven't been educated that, yes, you are hired to do the best job that you can and due diligence, but you're not personally responsible for the losses of the company.
Yeah. That, it's a tough one. What's coming to mind for me right now is from a security perspective. And I'm big on, I don't know if you've heard of Project Aristotle, but Google did a project called Project Aristotle, is studying the best teams in the world, right? And what is it about the best teams? And they studied hundreds of teams. And the one thing that was the biggest factor in having world-class teams is an environment of psychological safety, right? And so letting people to know, like, look, you can speak up, you can own up to your mistakes, you're not going to get fired or whatever, right? Just give them the security around that. But when you talk about security teams, it's like their job is to secure that environment, but you still have to have that trust. You still have to have that like ability to, hey, we screwed up, let's do better next time. And so I could understand how a lot of security teams, a lot of security leaders could be fearful that if there's a big enough mistake, they're like, crap, like that could mean my job, right? And it could just be inevitable, but I would think that that's a tough dynamic. Any thoughts on that?
I wrote a review of psychology and security, a book on psychology and security, and I can't remember the exact name, but it's on my LinkedIn profile, one of the articles that I wrote. And in there, they deal with some of those exact type of issues. Not just the psychology of the malignant mind that is bringing these, trying to perpetrate, but also the mind of the professionals who are trying to defend and mitigate the problems. It's a very interesting book. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm not prepared to talk about it, but it is an article that I wrote in a review. And it was interesting because I got acquainted with all the authors. There were 5 or 6 authors of this thing. And I contacted them and said, hey, I wrote a review of your book. And it's like, wow, you're one of the 5 people who read it. So they were very grateful that I had acknowledged them and by reviewing the book. It's an excellent book, and I would recommend it to anybody. You can find it on the articles that I've written on LinkedIn.
Nice. Appreciate that recommendation. So, you know, as far as your experience in high pressure situations like 9/11, the DDoS attack and military engagements that you've been involved in, you know, as far as your perspective on mental strength and endurance in crisis management, you know, what does that look like? Do you have a philosophy there?
Well, let's talk about one of the biggest denial of services that I responded to was the U.S. stock markets. Went into one of the stock markets, and there was a huge denial of service that was bringing not only this stock market, but all the stock markets. So once an attacker finds a vector that's successful, they start doing it to other people. And a distributed denial of service means that the attackers take machines from around the internet and use them to attack a central situation like the stock markets. So in that, they couldn't solve the problem readily, called me. I was on the West Coast at the time. I flew in, and I go by the handle Packetman 007. So I look at packets. I look at the things that happen on the wire that are indisputable. So when I got there, I plugged in my analyzer, and I saw that the packets that were coming in from all of these distributed things were using some of the same tactics in each and every attempt. It's called a SYN attack, and it's part of the TCP three-way handshake. And so it just sends connect requests habitually to these guys. But the SYN attack was using the exact same sequence number for millions of these attacks. So what I did was, I went in and diagnosed that almost immediately. And then I said, look, you just need to filter out that one sequence number and allow all the other sequence numbers. And there's, for instance, there's 4 billion potential sequence numbers. So killing one sequence number out of 4 billion is nothing. But that's what the hackers had written in the code, and they reused it over and over. So we just put another firewall, which was basically what I call a multi-tier firewall architecture. And the first firewall stopped the bulk attack so that the second firewalls could execute the higher granularity of security rules. Because when the attack happened, it basically melted down all these firewalls, because the firewalls have very granular rules and have to go through a lot of processing. So by taking out and having a multi-tier and taking out in the first tier all those what I call bulk attack, it allowed the firewalls to only have to deal with the standard data that got through, and we pulled that. Now, in every one of those instances, right, there's executives, there's technologists who, again, they feel responsible, or, they couldn't solve it. And I've been doing this for 40 years, been looking at packets since 1980. It's pretty hard to have a problem that, I certainly don't see the same problem over and over again, but you still have the same methods. So trying to help technologists understand that they are still viable, they're still very powerful, and it takes a team. So I come in with my focused forensic view, and then they take it to the next level. And as a team, we solve those problems together. And that's sometimes in the technical world, there's a little bit of competition. So I've had to figure out how to not make people upset because of what they weren't able to do before I got there. And that's a psychological element of doing critical problem resolution, is making sure that people know, hey, I'm a specialist in this particular little area. I know this really well, but you guys have all the other pieces to the puzzle, and together we can work on it and solve it.
Yes. The human ego does play into many things these days. So just quickly before we start to kind of close out here, because we're getting close on time. On that note, what you're just talking about, what makes a great team during disaster response and recovery, in your opinion?
So the way that I do it, and I have some diagrams actually for this, and I've been promulgating this since the early 90s. I call them care teams, and we take the best people out of the server team, the network team, the desktop team, the application team, the security team. And we create a team of the very best for critical problem resolution. And then we go and put that team together, and they can reach back into their organizations to help solve the problem. And we don't have to have just one silo alone trying to solve a problem. So if application people are the only ones trying to solve the application problem, maybe there's some server component, platform component, cloud component, or network component that is added to that. And so we need a cross-platform, cross-technology set of people to be able to address those problems. So back into the network documentation area. When we go into to build a Tiger team to address their network documentation problems and bring that to fruition, people think you can't do it. We can never get this done. It's just too big. It's too complex. I've gone into very large institutions, big oil companies, railroads, mass transit organizations, some of the biggest in the world. We can diagram those out in a matter of 3 to 5 weeks. But that's because we have good methods and we know how to bring the right people from all the silos together. The best documenters, those are the ones who help us with documentations. The best troubleshooters, those are the ones who help us with critical problem resolution. And the same goes for metrics teams, people who measure the metrics and tell us what the numbers are for all the performance issues and that sort of thing. So whether it's metrics, network documentation, or something of that nature, we pull those teams together and we create a team. And I call one of those teams for documentation the DocuNet team, right? Or the metrics team. And then each one of those teams is enduring. I'm gone, but they keep those teams, they charter those teams, and then those teams, and that is a very powerful element of building expertise in your organization, is not trying to do it with a bunch of people who don't know anything. You bring somebody like me, and I don't know their environment, but I know the technologies, and then they assemble the best people within each from all the technology areas and all the silos so that we can work as a team and bring those solutions to the organization very fast.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you come in and you have those key players that can orient you to the environment. They understand the historical data. They understand where everything's at, all that good stuff. And then you work together as like a special forces unit to attack the problem. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
That's the command and control. That's kind of the role that I play is the centralized command and control. And believe me, when we go in to solve these problems, there's always people wanting to know, did you find it yet? Did you find it yet? Did you find it yet? And so I have to protect the technology people from continual statusing. Now, we do have to give a status. Usually we give a status once a day. And then you can, because sometimes I've learned that, oh, eureka, we found it. and I've said it too quickly, and then it didn't come to fruition and people lose confidence in you. So you have to very carefully, once a day, give the status. Under promise and over deliver is a culture that is really powerful, and especially within a team. Under promise, over deliver, everybody's happy in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that approach for sure. Last quick question here, Bill. So what technologies does the world need that doesn't exist yet for better disaster recovery and cybersecurity?
Okay. I have just written in the last couple of years 2 patents in the security area. These 2 patents have to deal with how far data can be sent. And what we do is we limit what's called packet lifetime, which is called a hop count or time to live. How long does a packet get to live in the internet? Well, you send a packet out into the internet and it goes through so many routers, and eventually it's going to be expunged from the network when the hop count goes to 0 or when the packet lifetime is gone. That technology and that capability, for instance, if you have an Oracle database server in the data center and it has a packet lifetime to go through 255 routers, it can go to North Korea, Russia, China right now, unless there's a perfect firewall. Is there a perfect firewall? We haven't seen one yet. So what we do is we say, look, this Oracle database should not go more than 4 routers or 5 routers, but it certainly should not have a packet lifetime of 255 routers. You're just asking for trouble because there isn't any such thing as a perfect firewall. So that's the kind of prevention technology that the military asked me to develop, and I responded and wrote these patents, and limiting how far packets can travel on the network, I believe, is something that's very powerful. In fact, the guy who truly invented the internet, his name is Vinton Cerf. He looked at our technology. He's the one who put the packet lifetime into the packets so that packets would go out and they would die after they had lived their packet lifetime. Otherwise, those packets would spin around in the internet forever, right? So he put those capabilities in. So we just simply use that capability to limit how far data can travel. That, I believe, is going to be one of the things that you can do to prevent your key data in an Oracle database from going out of your data center. Very powerful.
Yeah, that's like the packet self-destruct mechanism.
Is, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Bill. So anybody listening, if you want to have, anybody listening, if you have some sort, not if you want to have some sort, but if you have some sort of a critical IT security or performance issue that you could use some help with, be sure to reach out to Bill Alderson. And, how can people reach you, Bill?
The best website to reach me on is cogent.management. No .com, just cogent.management. You can find me there. And of course, on my LinkedIn profile, which you're welcome to share with folks.
Perfect. Bill, thanks for joining us today and sharing your insights. Really always great talking to you. And, listeners, also be sure to connect with Bill on LinkedIn. His handle is Bill Alderson. So it's linkedin.com/in/Bill, BILL. ALDERSON /. And we will have website links and social media handles in the show description for your convenience. To recap, in today's episode, we discussed Bill's experience in guiding organizations through security crises and the mental challenges that he faced during events like 9/11 and military engagements. This information is only valuable if you use it to take some sort of action or you put it into action. So to make sure you benefit from this episode, take a moment to reflect and write down how your own mental resilience shows up in times of stress or some sort of a breach scenario. And, use this to help you to respond effectively and potentially proactively get ahead of problems or have a plan to get ahead of problems before they happen. Last but not least, don't forget to help your fellow tech humans. Share this podcast and follow me on LinkedIn at Javier Guerra 360. See you next time on the Tech Human Experience.
The Tech Human Experience